One of the biggest things I've learned in this profession as well is that one of the greatest things you can do is build relationships with nurses around you and nurses within your organization, and even just nursing leaders, and how those relationships can then impact your life in ways that you never imagined.
Welcome to Nursing Beyond the Bedside. I'm Audrey, your host, and a nurse who pivoted my path several years ago. After 8 years as a critical care nurse, I was ready for change. I craved higher pay and more flexibility, but was struggling to find a clear path forward. Fast forward through positions in recruiting, customer success, and marketing, and many lessons learned along the way. Today, I run Pivot Path, a company dedicated to empowering nurses to redefine their careers. This podcast is designed to help you navigate the journey from clinical bedside nursing to a fulfilling career that aligns with your passions and goals. Here, you'll discover inspiring stories from nurses who've gone beyond the bedside, successfully transitioning to non-clinical roles, or redefining their nursing career. Join us as we hear their stories and share actionable strategies to help you make your own leap. Whether you're a new listener curious about what lies beyond the bedside, or a returning audience member in need of some fresh motivation, this podcast is your go-to resource for exploring new opportunities that can transform your career. Let's get started. Today we have a special guest joining us all the way from Australia. Nalani Cox is a nurse leader who has carved an extraordinary path in healthcare systems improvement. As the Assistant Director of Nursing for Referral Strategy and Performance at Gold Coast Health, Nalani has transformed how patients access specialist care across Queensland. From her early days in discharge planning to leading million-dollar transformation projects, her story showcases how nurses can leverage their clinical expertise to create system-wide impact. Nalani is passionate about helping nurses recognize their potential and the diverse opportunities within our profession. Nalani, welcome to Nursing Beyond the Bedside.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
You have carved a pretty extraordinary path for yourself. So I'm excited to share kind of how you got to where you are. So to kick us off, why don't you take us back to the early days and what drew you to nursing in the beginning?
Yeah, sure. It's funny, actually, because when I was in high school, I was actually not even thinking about healthcare at all. I was so focused on becoming a marine biologist of all things. And I don't know if you've ever heard of much what goes on at the Gold Coast, but there's a beautiful theme park called SeaWorld, and I always just imagined that I'd be there like helping save injured animals and things like that. But one of my teachers was like, "Oh, are you really sure that's what you wanted to do?" and made me really kind of introspectively think on that. And then I was like, no, actually, I think I want to do something to help people. So I was kind of going down the path of medicine. And then I stopped to think about all the people that were around me and just like learning more about the professions. And then I thought about midwifery and nursing. So I actually then decided to do my nursing and midwifery degree, and I got both qualifications through university then. And you kind of learn a bit about what a nurse does, but it just really opened my eyes once I got to university and started actually meeting people and understanding what the profession was, that there was just so much more to nursing than what is ever kind of advertised or what you see as like the profession and how it's portrayed. So yeah, I'm really, really happy that I got into that profession, and it's just kind of expanded and led to a career path that I actually never knew that I would ever kind of go down, but also just never imagined would be possible, really.
I think that what you just called out about nursing being so much more than what's portrayed about the profession is so key. I think that really, even from inside the profession, sometimes you don't see all of the opportunity that you have with your nursing career.
Yeah, it's so true.
Yeah. And so, which is like why this podcast is so great, because we get to hear about all of the nurses who have kind of like found those different paths. And you started off doing something a little bit different than a lot of like new graduates, right? Like you worked in discharge planning and then switched to something a bit more clinical. Tell us about how that all played out for you.
Yeah. So one of the biggest things I've learned in this profession as well is that one of the greatest things you can do is build relationships with nurses around you and nurses within your organization, and even just nursing leaders, and how those relationships can then impact your life in ways that you never imagined. So I had applied for a graduate program within a really large organization, and it was at a time where not a lot of nurses were being hired. We had a really big change in the workforce. So I think only about 25% of the grads of my year actually got jobs straight out. So it just so happened that when I was on student placement, I built some really great relationships with some of the nurses in the organization that I had applied for. And one of those nurses just happened to be talking to her manager when my resume popped to the top of the list for a graduate position that was brand new for the organization. And that nurse was like, "Oh, I've worked with her as a student. You should definitely give her a shot." And so it was so lucky, and I'm so thankful for that opportunity. But yeah, I went into a department where it was the very first time they'd offered a graduate position. He was using a lot of those clinical judgment and clinical assessment skills that you, as a graduate, know that you need to develop, but you're not really sure how to do that. So I immediately became the kind of discharge planner for a 60-bed inpatient orthopedic ward, having not really that much history in orthopedics and really not understanding kind of the connection between the hospital system and the community, and then having to work out how to connect those two things to help patients navigate back to their normal lives. So it was such an amazing role, and I learned so much around the broader healthcare system and, how we need to think about the patient as a whole person from the get-go of their admission, rather than just thinking about the condition that they're there to be treated for. And yeah, that really helped set me up for the next steps of my career, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really unique that you did get such a broad view of everything that goes on with the patient, kind of like a project manager role right from the start.
Absolutely. And learning how to work with allied health and, the doctors, and learning when, you really need to advocate for what's safe, and understanding the patient's social situation as well. And I think often we get into these roles where it kind of feels a bit hierarchical, where you go, "Oh, well, if the medical officer has said that, that's the way that it needs to go." Whereas I was a new grad in my first year going, "Actually, you can't discharge them home. It's not safe in their environment. And these are the reasons why." And then having to work out how to influence that outcome. So yeah, it was very confidence building from the get-go. But yeah, some of the greatest challenges as well. And Queensland is such a large state. And I was working in one of the tertiary facilities, and we would have to discharge plan for patients who were living 9 hours away, and then understand the services that are available in their area. So yeah, it was very eye-opening, that's for sure.
Yeah, I don't want to jump too far ahead in your story yet, but I'm already seeing the parallels between that first job and kind of pulling together all of the resources to what you do now with referrals. So I know that we want to get there and get to how a lot of those skills apply to kind of where you got to. But first, I also think it's interesting, and something I want to touch on is you mentioned how building relationships is really crucial. And I totally agree with that. Just like networking outside of nursing is really important for business professionals. However, I think that nursing sometimes gets a bad rap for nurses eating their young.
Yes.
But I talk to so many nurses who have had a mentor or someone within their circle who has really championed for them, who has been kind of the unlock to a new path and their success. So I think that that's really important to call out. But there's also the flip side of that. I know that you had a challenging experience when you switched from discharge planning to a geriatric ward, when you had a preceptor that didn't love the path that you had set yourself on initially. Talk to me a little bit about that and just kind of the lessons that you took from that experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think you hit the nail on the head. Sometimes there's people who really define your career in terms of the path that you can go by supporting you there. But there's the opposite, where you have this experience that you're not expecting, but then you can either use it to drive you or you can use it to keep you back. So that first kind of graduate role was really being the first of its kind. It makes people feel uncomfortable often because they go, "Well, what are you getting out of that?" Or "What skills are there?" And like we said in university, the profession is so diverse, but often you learn about the clinical skills and you learn about the clinical environment you can work in, and sometimes hard to see everything else that's outside of that. So the nurse educator that I went onto the ward basically felt like everything I had done for the previous 12 to 18 months was a waste of time. So she assessed me on my very first clinical assessment on that ward, and then failed me on absolutely every single component of that assessment. And to be honest, as somebody who strives for excellence and really wants to be good at their job all of the time, it almost broke me. I left that day and I still remember it. And I was like, "Oh my goodness, how could I have let it get so bad? Am I a terrible nurse? How am I going to fix this?" And then I thought, no, this is one person's opinion. This is one person's view of me. This is one person's view of my skills. I know that I can do this. What do I need to do to make this better? So every single thing she found me on, I just worked out what courses I could go to, what ways I could practice those skills. I put myself in every kind of clinical scenario in the ward that I possibly could. I started supporting the junior nurses underneath me and then learning from them. And then, just going, okay, what can I do? And I kept going back to that educator to say, what can I do next? What can I do next? And 6 months later, I was the only nurse on the ward who could take blood. I was the only nurse on the ward who could put cannulas in, and I was assessed by her doing that as well. I was team leading shifts. I was doing some work for the nurse unit manager. And there was one shift on a Sunday where I was team leading, where we had a really big weather incident that we needed some after hours management for. And I had to come up with this plan on the fly. And that shift went really well, and everyone was kept safe, and we had to move patients around. And then, a couple of months after that, I picked up a really large medication error on a night duty and was managed to resolve that and work through that with the medical team. And she assessed me then a couple of weeks later and passed me on everything. And she actually said to me, I really underestimated you, and you've really shown me, where your skills can actually be really valuable. And I felt like at that point, I was like, yeah, this is what we have to do. We can't just let people put us down and let us refine where we're going to go. We have to push through and show people in the nursing profession that it's, not just your clinical skills that matter. It's all of the other skills around that too.
Yes, totally. I just love that story of resilience, because I think that there are a couple of things that are important. One is what you called out about just what you're doing before was just kind of unknown. It was new. And I feel like nurses kind of sometimes hold each other to this straight and narrow path that we've kind of been taught. And anything outside of that just seems what are you doing kind of thing.
Yeah.
And the second thing is, and this is something that you said to me in our last conversation about the situation that really just stood out to me, is you said that you can't judge someone based on the path that they've chosen. You judge them on how they adapt and apply themselves. And I think that is just such a good takeaway for whatever end of that type of situation you're on, right? Whether you are that nurse educator who has someone new on the unit, or if you are that new nurse who needs to take that feedback and do something positive with it.
Absolutely. And I think as a leader now, and leading nurses myself and working with a lot of nurses, I use that experience to guide me in the way that I interact with them. I look at their background and I look at their CV and where they've been, and I go, okay, how can I learn from you? What can you teach me about your path? And, how is that going to help the role that you're going into, or help, my knowledge base move forward as well? Because, we're all having different experiences all of the time. Nursing's so diverse that not one of us would have exactly the same career path ever, or exactly the same patient experiences. So if we don't use that learning to help us grow in the profession, it's actually to our own detriment. So yeah, I think it's a really, really important thing to focus on.
I agree. And I feel like that situation was just kind of the foundation that you would carry forward with you, through different leadership experiences. And so as you kind of climbed that ladder and became more and more of a leader within the nursing profession, I know that you mentioned that you were involved in a nurse leadership program that was kind of a catalyst for you. Tell us a little bit about what that program was and how it helped you take those bigger steps in your career.
Yeah, in Australia, we have a large professional body called the Australian College of Nursing. And a couple of jobs later, after the geriatric ward, I was in a role where I was, again, doing something different. And this is where I had started kind of going into the referral management space. And it was really hard to get people to really understand what I was passionate about or what I was trying to achieve, because, again, it was different in nursing. And I saw an application pop up for what was then called the Mid-Career Nurse Leadership Program, which is now called the Nursing Director Program. And I was like, oh, you know what? I feel like I need to do something. So I put my hat in the ring for it. And it was an application for the inaugural group. So they were only taking 20 people, and there was 3 scholarships available. And I was like, oh, maybe I might get a scholarship as well. And then I kind of, put the application and forgot about it. And then was really surprised when I did get the scholarship and then got to go. And honestly, it was one of the most profoundly career-changing experiences ever. I got to join 19 other nurses from across Australia to learn from some of the greatest nurse leaders in Australia. So we had the chief nurse of Australia. We have chief nurses in all of the states across Australia. So some of those nurse leaders presented to us. We had people talking to us about the nursing impact within climate change. We learned about finance, and we learned about the business side of nursing as a profession. And I just thought it was the first time where I was like, actually, the path that I'm on is not just unique to me. There's so many other people out there that are doing this having this journey and doing this role in a different way. And it was the first time that I felt really, really connected to the profession and thought, actually, no, I can create some really good change here. So going away from that, I got to do articles for the Australian College and got really invested in the engagement. But the networks and the relationships I built in there, again, have helped me all the way through, because now we've got people that I can call upon to grow from and have mentoring from on a frequent basis. But I always refer back to that content that I learned there. And there's not very often that you go to a course where you just frequently go, yeah, that's so helpful and I can apply that every single day. And, now I help teach in some of those Australian College of Nursing courses as well. So I've been able to give back to that too, which is really important to me as well.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I think the important message there is kind of like taking that extra step to be involved in the profession. I know it's really easy. And like, I was this way for a good part of my nursing career of just like, I'm here to work my shift, clock in, take care of my patients, clock out. And like, after that, like, it's my time. I'm not at work. I'm not doing extra credit. But, I think that if you are someone who's thinking about like where else you can go in your career, like getting involved in this in like professional organizations, leadership groups, like taking like additional certifications, particularly when it comes to like leadership and kind of filling those knowledge gaps that like we as nurses often have when it comes to like the finance world and like the business of healthcare.
Some of the best nursing leaders or the leaders of our organization are people who have nursing as backgrounds, but have just built those extra skills on top. Like, it's like building blocks in a house. Like, you can't have a house without all of the foundations and then all of the extra kind of skills that go along with that, or the extra items. So it's building up your repertoire. You don't have to use them all the time, but if you have nursing and your clinical knowledge as a foundation, and then you can apply that to business cases, or you can apply that to selling the big idea that you have, or that you can help leverage a relationship or some type of networking engagement that you've done to then help you get to that next stage. Like, that stuff is the stuff that we don't learn in university. It's the stuff that's not taught, but it's stuff that is so, so important. And it's amazing. Other professions, I feel like allied health and some medical professions, they're really good at integrating mentoring into their career from the get-go. I don't feel like nursing is the same as that. So then really understanding how mentoring works and having those opportunities as well, it's really can be quite transformative, and it can take you on a path that you never knew that you wanted. And I think what we're experiencing across the world right now is this high level of nursing burnout, and it's a high level of nursing fatigue. And, these professional organizations are here to help show where nursing is going and help listen to the profession and help guide what the next steps are. But without engaging in them and being able to share your voice as well, it kind of feels like you're really alone, and you don't have to feel that way. There's so many of us. We're one of the highest number of profession across the world and one of the most trusted. Like, we need to trust each other and need to connect with each other to be able to build that contingency.
Yeah, definitely. I love that. And talking about how that type of involvement can get you to new places in your career, I want to spend some time really diving into your specialty now, which is referral management. So before we like really get in too deep, give us kind of like the lay of the land of like how referrals work, why referral management is important, and like kind of where you fit into all of that.
Yeah. So in Australia, we have our general practice kind of community system. So these are our GPs in community that will see you all the time. So you often have like a family GP, or you kind of engage with our primary care clinicians. They sit in the community to manage the myriad of conditions that we experience. But at the point in time, you then need to get referred into the hospital sector. Now, it's quite different across all of the states of Australia. It's not the same. And I don't know what it's like in America, but basically in Queensland, in order to get into the public health system for an outpatient service, or to see a specialist or a nurse or an allied health professional, you need a referral. Now, these referrals have to meet certain guidelines and have to have certain criteria in them so that we can make sure that we're assessing the right urgency of your care from the point that we receive that referral. So I often talk about it as, in the emergency department, you can see a patient and you can assess their urgency based on doing that clinical assessment of them. What we're doing is the clinical assessment of the patient without that patient being present. So that referral really needs to highlight all of the things that we need to see in a really good clinical handover so that we can make an adequate decision. Now, we receive in our organization over 100,000 of these referrals per year. So we need to make sure that every single decision that we're making is in the best interest of the patients. And then often what happens is that patients then end up onto a waiting list based on their category of urgency. And then we try and book them into an outpatient appointment. So, sometimes the most dangerous place that they can be is in that point between the point that referral is there and then the point that they're seen, because you can't see what's going on with them in between. So I focus on making sure that referral management process works as aligned to best practice as possible, and make sure that it's safe, that it's consistent, and that we can work on improving the quality and the safety of our care every day with every new service that we create. And then I try and make sure that information is transparent for all of the people who need to create those referrals, as well as the patients who then benefit from that care.
Yeah. And so remind me, what was the role or position that you were in that kind of like raised a flag for you here that there's improvement that can be made in the system?
Yeah. So after I left the geriatric ward, I went into a role called a GP liaison officer, which is something that Queensland has, where it's basically a connection point between the health service and the primary care community. Because we operate in completely different health systems and completely different rules and regulations, it's that connection point to build that network and, again, those relationships to try and understand what's broken. And so I undertook the implementation of referral guidelines for the state into GP practices in that role. So it was the first of its kind project, again, where we had to really bring GPs on the journey with us through the change. But what that did is showed me the side of, I guess, the healthcare system that I had absolutely no idea about, how hard it was for GPs, how difficult it was with communication that was breaking down, where they didn't get their feedback from the referrals they were putting in, like where the system was just a bit disconnected. And then I started thinking, well, how can I fix this? How can I make this better? How can I make this less cumbersome for GPs? But ultimately, how can I make that patient transition through that journey much more streamlined? So once I got into that referral management space, and then after I went to the Australian College of Nursing course, the penny just kind of started dropping. And I was like, oh, that, and then, oh my goodness, that. And then I just kind of, at that time, I was then offered a job at the Gold Coast to kind of use my expertise to then guide the development of these programs at the Gold Coast. And, I was kind of invigorated and I was excited about what I just learned. So I was like, okay, like, I feel like this needs to happen. I feel like these are the big ideas. And, the scope that I actually got employed to do at Gold Coast turned into being a much bigger journey than I ever imagined, just because I could use all of my skills from my previous jobs to just see the fragmentation and the opportunities for improvement. And when I'm engaging with services now, I don't talk about, oh, that's broken or that's not right or you're not doing that right. I go, this is an opportunity for improvement, because every single thing that we find has a chance to be fixed. And so it's about how we go about that. So that was kind of that transition into that space where I could go, yes, actually, I've got a lot of expertise in this area now. I understand it from different perspectives. How can I apply that while using my nursing skills to then really guide it from a clinical perspective? Because people often respect people that have ideas that are talking about it from a clinical sense. I was able to sell the ideas to executive. I was able to talk and engage with the medical directors, the nurses, the allied health, because I could use that clinical knowledge. But then I could also think about it from a consumer perspective, from a patient side, because I had learned so much from those people around me who were working with the patients that we could kind of guide that change as well. And I think that's where the power comes from, is when you think about things from the different perspectives and can pull that all together.
Yeah. And I think that that's what makes nurses so valuable in like many types of positions like this, because we really understand the healthcare system probably like to a deeper, broader extent than a lot of people would give us credit for, right? Like,
I agree.
We understand all of the clinical workflows. We are used to communicating with all of the different teams involved in the patient's care. We understand the patient experience and throughput through the system.
Yes.
So we have all of these different pieces that we can pull together. So I love that you kind of like realized that, and you had this idea and you raised your hand. You're like, please, like, let me fix this.
And I knew that, like, when I was going into that health service, like, I didn't know everything. Like, I can never claim to know everything. But it's then going, okay, well, I don't know these people, but I need to build relationships with them. I need to understand what they know and I need them to teach me. So it's never about then going, okay, well, I can't progress something because I don't know the answer to that question. It's going, who does know the answer and how can I work with them to then discover that? And there was a lot of work that I had to do around that too. And I think that's really important, because sometimes that holds people back, but it's kind of a freeing step to move forward with your big idea.
Did you ever meet any people, like stakeholders along the way, where like you needed their buy-in, you needed their support, and for one reason or another, you had to like kind of whether it's being like as a nurse or, at the stage in your career as you were, did you feel like you had to prove yourself at any point along the way?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's multiple challenges that you come across moving through roles like this. People can sometimes immediately judge you as you walk in the room. They expect something from you that might be different based on your appearance, based on how young you might look, based on their perception of what your experience might be. So immediately you need to try and prove yourself to them and demonstrate your own capability. And I think that can be really jarring sometimes, and you can feel like you're in a really vulnerable space, but working out how to push through that. And I failed a couple of times, and I think that's just as good of a learning as anything, as failing and then thinking about how to do that differently. But failing and not giving up, because some of those people who I had the most challenges with eventually became the biggest supporters, but I had to really work on it. Then there is just people with different opinions, or people who just don't want to do change in the system. It's those people who, like you talked about, that want to come to work, do their job, and then go home, move into leadership positions, but then you're trying to use them to influence change, but they're not interested in change. It's really, really challenging. And I think the other scenario is where there's just personalities within the system that don't necessarily align. So you have to just kind of work out what's important to them to then try and get their trust and their buy-in. So sometimes I was doing I would go to a meeting to try and sell some change that I wanted to do. And then all of a sudden we'd be down here in this tangent about talking about this other problem that was happening. And then I was trying to work out when, their digital upgrade was going to happen, or see if I could progress that when that had nothing to do with me. But, it's about resolving that problem to build trust, or getting back to them with some information they want, because that's important to them to get that buy-in to then be able to take your idea forward. So I think one of the other skills that's really undervalued in nursing, other than networking, is change and engagement ability. And I think once you kind of work your way through that and learn different communication styles from different people, you can slowly get through to understanding where people are coming from, but also what you need to do to kind of bring them on that journey with you, because that's quite different for different people depending on how they react. And, the work that I've done has engaged with hundreds and hundreds of stakeholders across the organization, and it becomes a pattern of behavior. You just learn to engage with people, and then you kind of can assess where you think something's going to go before it actually gets there. But I still get it wrong. I don't always get it right. But, it's about learning from those experiences as well. But yeah, there's definitely some difficult conversations that you need to have. And those conversations can be quite vulnerable, quite draining, and quite difficult.
Yeah, I think it takes some major mental fortitude to push through that. But I think that you're right about nurses being very skilled at, I think the empathy comes into play when it's understanding the other person's perspective and where they're coming from. And that alone helps you then fine tune your communication to them, however it needs to be. And whether we realize it or not, nurses are doing that a lot at the bedside, every family is different, they're dealing with a large amount of stress, and you have to figure out kind of what place you're meeting them at to be able to communicate with them effectively. So
I think that's one of the things I find too. I think, when I'm mentoring people through CVs and things like that, when they're looking at jobs to apply for, they go, but I've never done any of that. And I was like, if you're convincing a family of a treatment pathway, or you're trying to talk them through that transition back to home, and then you're engaging with them around that, that's change management skills, that's engagement skills. If you're building relationships with those family or those doctors, that's networking. It might not be in the same way of what is provided, but you can do it because you're already doing it. And it's just that kind of encouragement and that fostering of that own self-confidence that tends to be the thing that they need to kind of move into that next phase of their career as well.
I totally agree with you. And I'm so glad that what you said actually comes up a lot on this podcast of nurses are looking at a job description that is a non-bedside, maybe non-clinical, more of a business type role. But so many of these things are looking for stakeholder management, relationship management, communication, and all of these things, you may not initially look at that and think oh yeah, I do that, because the words used in a job description and the business role are different than those things, and how they appear within the nursing world. But drawing those parallels is just a good exercise for you to have in mind as a nurse, because
Absolutely.
The things you do are so transferable. You just sometimes have to explain those situations more to someone who doesn't have that healthcare background to help them see the parallels there.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's so important. And the earlier you can do that in your career, the better, because you then become so good at then working out where your skill set can align to that next opportunity, or even just where your skill deficits are and where you need to grow in that space. And then how do you kind of work out whether you engage in a professional body, whether you do, internal professional development, or you get a mentor. Like if you can identify that skill set that you've got and apply the key capabilities that you're doing on an everyday job to that, you're setting yourself up for success because you can immediately sell yourself better than the next person.
Yes, I totally agree with that. And speaking of nursing skills, because I think that there's like so many like strong things that we develop like fundamentally in our nursing career. But you mentioned that through your path, like you certainly didn't know everything. And so there was a lot that you had to learn along the way and like pick up new skills quickly. How did you approach that learning curve along the way? Like, were there specific things that you did or resources that you tapped on along the way?
Yeah, I think I always tell everybody that I'm a bit addicted to professional development at this point. So I love learning. I did a postgraduate certificate in digital healthcare because I, realized that we're moving into a digital age in our healthcare systems, and some of the things that I needed to be an expert on, I didn't know how to be an expert on, and I needed to learn. So, everyone goes, "Oh, how is digital health, connected to nursing?" But there's so many things I learned in that postgrad certificate that I still use on a day-to-day basis, and things that you would never think that you would be able to pull upon. But I've now used it to solve some clinical incidents because I understand how the technology works. The mid-career nurse leadership program was 5 days of intensive learning with programs every single day, and not every single one of those I've used, but some of those things I've then reached out to those facilitators and say, can you please teach me more? How can I grow in this space a little bit more? And some of those times aren't necessarily straight away. It might be 2 or 3 years down the track. And it's amazing. You kind of go, oh, they won't remember me, or, oh, that's not a question they'll want to answer. But then you kind of reach out to them and they're an expert in that field. They're absolutely committed to helping the growth of nurses as well. So they want to respond and they want to help. Mentoring has been a huge one for me. I have reached out and kind of asked some really great nursing leaders to be mentors for me. And I've not always got a yes, and that's okay. But when I have got a yes, I've learned and grown from that. But I've also kind of set my own path in terms of what I wanted to learn and grow from. But I think the biggest learning is just in the day-to-day. It's the people that you meet on the job day-to-day. Like I now spend so much time in meetings and engaging with people across the organization. I learn something from each of them every single day. And I definitely couldn't have done half the things that I've done without just the sheer kind of osmotic learning that happens just in general conversation. And I think that's where the biggest power comes from, is recognizing that and then engaging with that, but then also empowering those people to teach you more about that as well, because people just get so good at their jobs that they forget that they're teaching other people, and they forget that their skill set is refined, that people don't necessarily know exactly what they do, or that they might not be interested in it. So just spending time with those people and just extracting everything that's in their mind, and then trying to use kind of the best bits of that. And then I think the other part of it was around how to communicate at different levels. So, as you move up in these roles, you get exposed to different levels of executive, you get exposed to different levels of stakeholders. You kind of see how meetings run, or how different professional processes have to be facilitated. And you kind of go, oh gosh, I've never been able to do that before. I've never done that before. Like, am I going to succeed at that? I think watching how everybody responds to that in a room, watching how somebody chairs a meeting, watching how somebody responds in a meeting, and then taking the best bits of those types of things as well, and then going, okay, I'm going to put that into my toolkit, and then basically building up your toolkit with all of the best parts of everybody else's knowledge. It's a compliment to those people around you, but it's also just so helpful for your own self-growth and development. And there's so many courses out there. There's so much education. There's so much learning. Nursing, I really strongly believe, is a lifelong learning profession, but you have to just reach out and kind of go for the opportunities when they present themselves, and, go to the networking event, go to the training course that you don't know if it will be relevant or not, because you might actually get something out of it that you never knew that you needed.
Yeah. And I want to double down on the mentorship and reaching out to mentors that you mentioned, because I think that early in my nursing career, had I heard someone say, like, just reach out and ask someone to mentor you, I would have been like, well, what does that even mean? What do I say? And what is like the expectation there? So share a little bit about kind of like what a reach out like that would like look like, and like how you might identify someone who you'd like to mentor you, and like what you could expect from that kind of relationship.
Yeah, sure. So I think for me, understanding when I needed a mentor was the first lesson. So I think you kind of get to a point where, and it could be on your day-to-day job at the bedside, it could be once you're kind of progressing outside of that, where you just kind of go, I'm stuck. Like I feel like I have some problems that I need to solve. I'm not quite sure how to get there yet, or I feel like I'm trying to solve them, but I don't know if I'm on the right journey. And you just need that little bit of help. And it's not necessarily focused on the skill base of what you're doing, but it also could just help with like your own personal connection to that, or your own personal feelings about that, or your own vulnerabilities about that, and how you connect them to a professional. Like I strongly believe that there's obviously two parts of people in a career. It's their professional side, but it's also their personal reactions and responses to the things that are going on, and they help drive their professional decisions. So mentoring doesn't necessarily just have to be about those professional decisions. It can help you focus on those personal drivers as well, and how to kind of control them or utilize them to the best of their ability. So for me, it was working out that I was kind of getting into a league of things that was making me feel uncomfortable again. It was a new space. I didn't feel comfortable in what I was doing anymore because I'd never done it before. So how can you then get a mentor who might have been through that challenge, but that can meet you on the other side of that to kind of help guide you through? And so when I was, again, coming back to the Australian College of Nursing, there is a national nursing forum that occurs every year where nurses from across Australia come together for a conference. And you build up networks and relationships through there. And sometimes those opportunistic kind of conversations come up where you go, oh, actually, would you be interested in doing some mentoring with me? And you can have that conversation organically. Other times it's just kind of doing some research inside the profession, whether it's in your organization or whether it's outside of your organization. And, it kind of feels a little bit like stalking, but it's not. Like it's just reaching out to people and going, I've seen what your career you've been doing. I'm really looking for some assistance in this, this, and this. Have you ever been considered doing mentoring? And I think there's so much information online now around the mentoring relationship, because it really needs to work for you. So, you might reach out to a mentor and have one session and go, actually, I just don't think we're going to align, because again, personalities don't always align. But there's also confidence and safety in saying that if that mentoring relationship goes well, where you can go, actually, I'm just not sure that we're the right fit. And I've had that before as well, where I just haven't felt it's the right fit, but, kind of calling it at that point and then moving on is also the right thing to do. So it does feel like a vulnerable space. You really do have to kind of flex into that discomfort to then be able to engage that mentoring process. But you also have to invest yourself in it too. So you can't expect to ask for a mentor and then think that they're just going to guide you the whole way. You really need to think about what I want out of this. What do I want to achieve? Where do I want to grow? And how can I make sure that, we're both getting something out of this? And often the mentor learns something just as much.
Yeah. And I think that what you called out about like having that self-reflection is really important. And you also called out how like your professional decisions are like guided by both professional and personal factors.
Yeah.
And so I think that really like taking that time to reflect, especially if you are, feeling stuck and feeling like, okay, I really feel like I need a different direction here. I just need to break through like whatever wall is in front of me. I think it's really important to think about like, okay, what do I value? Like what's important to me? Like what am I passionate about and like interested in? And like, how does that guide like what I enjoy working on? And like kind of let those things help guide your path forward. And of course, worked into that is like the chapter of life that you're in and like what you're optimizing for in that chapter, right? Like, are you young, like pre-kids and you are just like full force ahead on your career? Are you 100%. Like a new mom and like, that you can't give 100% to your career right now, but you want to still like learn and like do something new. So I think that calling out that it is like melding of personal and professional factors is totally natural and just an important thing to reflect on.
And it's in that process, it's that essence of self-forgiveness as well. Like you can't be 100% all the time. You can't be perfect all of the time, but nobody also expects you to be. And you can give what you can give, but if you're giving too much of yourself and not focusing on your own self-care and your own self-worth and your own self-forgiveness, you're actually not going to be progressing yourself forward or contributing the best to anybody around you as well. Like I, have been through that journey. Part of my role at Gold Coast and delivering some of the really big transformative work, I did become a new mum during that time. And I did have a baby right in the middle of kind of achieving all of those things, and then had to go on 12 months maternity leave and then had to come back and then learn how to still give all of those things And because I had worked with so many people in that time and was going at this certain pace, that's kind of what people expected when you came back, because that's what you had shown them before. But you have to forgive yourself and you have to set people's expectations up for that. But you also have to struggle internally to kind of make sure that you realize that that's okay, and to kind of know enough about yourself where you can go, actually, I can't give 100% today, but my 100% today might look like achieving these 3 excellent things. And I need to then be happy with that. But tomorrow I might achieve these 8 excellent things because tomorrow I've had a better night's sleep, or tomorrow my child hasn't been sick, or tomorrow, I feel more hydrated and more energized. And I think that's such a really, really important lesson. And that self-care journey through that with our own personal growth is such an important factor, especially for nurses who tend to be empathetic by nature. So they give away the majority of themselves to other people just inherently.
I think that is huge for our listeners to hear, because a lot of them are experiencing nurse burnout at the bedside, right? And like working at the bedside, we're working in this environment where we give, and we probably don't focus on our self-care and like boundaries enough. We're picking up the overtime shifts because there was a call out, or, whatever it might be. And a lot of us work in an environment where being perfect, I mean, I know that we can't be 100% perfect, but being pretty darn close is important, right? Because like patient safety is on the line. So I do think that that's an important like mindset shift that is important to like remember at the bedside, but like particularly when you're pivoting into something else, I think that recognizing you're not working in the same environment anymore where like, patient safety, like in role, like the clinical decisions you're making, like patient safety is like still very much at the forefront. But when you're not like hands-on handling those like medications, and like that demand of perfection is not quite as high. And so I think that what you called out about like self-forgiveness and just recognizing that like you don't have to be perfect, and like it's okay to make mistakes and learn from them is important, and like I think that your mindset and like how you recover from those like learning moments of like, okay, I tried this, that didn't work, so like let me learn from that and try it different next time. I think that like instead of just being hard on yourself about that mistake, like learning from it and realizing that you can just do better next time is huge.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're never ever going to get through the career without mistakes. We're never going to get through without going, oh, I could have done that better. We're never going to get through going, that day was absolutely perfect every single day. Like, we slip up, we make mistakes. We're human just as much as the person who's the patient. The difference is that we have the profession aligned to us, and people expect more from us because we are nurses and because they trust us. But, like you said, you just need to look at yourself and go, okay, well, how can I learn from that? How do I make sure that I don't do that again? But also, how do you forgive yourself and resonate with the choices that you're making to move forward, rather than staying in that mistake, staying in that error and self-punishing? Because that's such a rough thing to do as well, is you can kind of play that over and over and over again and go, that's kind of defining me now. And I lose confidence from that, as opposed to going, I'm gaining confidence because I picked that up. I'm accepting it and taking accountability for it. And then I'm using that to then grow myself, and then using that to then grow the experiences of other people around you. Some of the mistakes that I have made through my career, I've then used that as an education point to go, this is something common that could happen, or this might happen, or in my experience. And, students that are coming through, or people in your career who you're kind of supporting their growth, they often really resonate with that if you can be vulnerable with them and be accountable for those tough things and share those stories, because it's a lived experience. And so it just helps them keep that in the back of their mind. And, when I go through steps of my career now, like I still remember when people have shared that type of thing with me before, and I go, oh yeah, that's how they handled that, or, that's how I need to think about that. So I think it's a really, really important thing. And additionally, like I think especially when you're stepping away from a bedside role, it's having that comfort and belief in yourself about why you're doing that, and the fact that that's okay. Because the world perception of nursing is you're at the bedside all of the time. And so people go, oh, don't you miss being a real nurse? Well, I am a real nurse. I am a real nurse doing real job that is doing some real change, and I'm impacting patient care, but in a completely different way. So I think it's also being comfortable and confident in yourself in that way as well, because like you said, that the excellence and the perfection expectations are different, but it doesn't mean you're not contributing to patient care just as importantly.
If you'd like to connect with Nalani after today's show, you can find her LinkedIn profile in today's show notes. Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to hit subscribe to keep up with our latest episodes. And if you were inspired by today's conversation, I hope you'll share this episode with someone who'd love it just as much as you did. If you're ready to pivot your path, sign up for my free newsletter at mypivotpath.com. Get non-bedside jobs delivered to your inbox every week. And if you have questions or just want to say hi, feel free to email me at audrey@mypivotpath.com. Thanks for listening, and until next time.